specialised module on children and climate change. This specialised module introduces the theme of climate change and children, with the aim to provide a children's perspective to the discussions on how to deal with this global crisis. The module will present how children are and can be impacted by climate change. It will then look at how children's resilience to climate change could be strengthened and at the benefits that can be provided by mitigation measures. It will also discuss solutions, focusing on the empowerment of children as actors of change and on the key role of governments in children's protection. Several examples are provided to illustrate the concepts presented. The module has been developed and peer-reviewed through UN CC Learn in close collaboration with the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. The impact of climate change on children. Section 1 provides an introduction to the vulnerability of children to climate change, while playing a key role in shaping the future of human society. Children are disproportionately affected by climate change. This section looks at different climate-related risks that threaten children, highlighting that their expected impacts will be distributed inequitably. Children on the climate frontline. This UNICEF video presents the views of various children around the world on climate change. They note the impacts they observe in their daily lives and the fears for their future, calling on world leaders to take ambitious action. The video shows that children are exposed to the effects of climate change. It also shows that they are willing to speak up and become important actors in protecting a more sustainable future. Watch the video to learn more.
I'm a bit nervous that the world is getting destroyed.
We are experiencing very hot summers and very cold winters.
Que van desapareciendo los glaciares.
都呼吸不到新鲜的空气。
We have people cutting down trees almost every day. We have people starting wildfires.
Vivimos en un ambiente que está constantemente lleno de humo.
Everyone is the source of climate change.
El cambio climático es el cambio que se produce en la Tierra porque la gente está contaminando mucho la Tierra.
Y no hay un clima establecido.
Some of the animals that live in the wetlands, they are dying.
Usually summer people plant maize, but because there wasn't much rain during that time, there was devastation to the crops and people were left hungry.
अब गाउँ घरमा फ्याक्ट्री बसाएको भएर त्यसको त्यो फ्याक्ट्रीको असरले गर्दा हाम्रो गाउँमा
I don't know anything about climate change.
If I grow up when there is no green, what would I tell my children?
There will be deserts everywhere, and that's my worst fear.
त्यसले गर्दाखेरि हामीले खाना पाउँदैनौँ
我会带我的家人离开这里，因为这里的空气实在是太不好了。
Creo que si seguimos así cuidando el medio ambiente, quizás podríamos estar de la forma anterior y ser mejor.
I'll tell them to make sure that the world is clean.
To tell everyone to stop polluting.
Que al igual que las personas tenemos derechos para que son respetados, ¿por qué no la naturaleza tener derechos?
Teach people out there that a tree has value when it's standing tall, when it's anchored in the ground as it should be.
应该让我们引导上电视，让我们县里的人都知道要爱护环境。
When you do actions, people will say that if our president is doing this, then we should also be doing it. So you shouldn't just tell them plant trees, recycle and things. They should see you do it, so that they're like, if he's doing it, if he's not too big to do that, we can also do it to save our climate.
All the stuff that we don't need, that we throw away, do stuff with that we don't need, put in a rocket, shoot through the sun.
This is not the time to just talk and talk, but this is the time to put action into our countries, into our societies, and look for ways that are going to sustain our lives.
We are the youth, and your decisions are what will help us go to a greener future.
There may be no greater growing threat facing the world's children and their children than climate change. There are 2.3 billion children in the world, representing 30% of the world's population, and this number is increasing. This makes them the largest group of people affected by climate change. Children are also more vulnerable than adults to its harmful effects. Many children born today will enjoy vast opportunities unavailable 25 years ago. However, despite the advances observed in the last decades, the global crisis posed by climate change has the potential to undermine all the gains that have been achieved in child survival and development, and to even promote greater dangers for the future. Further information. Climate change refers to changes in climate characteristics, including temperature, humidity, rainfall, wind, and severe weather events over long-term periods. The world's distribution of children and climate risks. Population under 18 years of age per square meters in 2015. The risks and impacts of climate change are and will be different across the planet. Therefore, the distribution of the world's population under 18 years of age has important implications for assessing how children will be affected. This map shows that there is a correspondence between high concentrations of children and tropical regions with developing economies, which are especially vulnerable to climate change. This is particularly the case in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Key climate risks in Africa derive from water stress, drought and floods. In Asia, from flooding, heat waves and drought. On the interactive program, you may explore more by clicking on the triangles to see examples of key climate risks, and we've done this for you. Africa. Key climate risks in Africa derived from drought and floods involve compounded stress on water resources from current overexploitation and degradation, and anticipated increases in demand for water. Due to increased variability of temperature and precipitation, particularly along the edges of their distribution, the incidence of geographic range of vector and waterborne diseases also increasingly vary. Asia. Key climate risks in Asia derived from flooding, heat waves and drought involve increased riverine, coastal and urban flooding, leading to widespread damage to infrastructure, livelihoods and settlements. Increased risk of heat-related mortality. Increased risk of drought-related water and food shortage causing malnutrition. Further information. Globally, children make up almost half of the population in developing countries and increasingly grow up in urban environments. The world's distribution of children and climate scenarios. The extent of GHG emission cuts will determine how many children will live in areas particularly affected by climate change. Taking ambitious action to limit emissions is therefore crucial to children's future well-being. Taking a forward look, scientists expect that the impacts of climate change will become much stronger. This would be the case even if all emissions of greenhouse gases, GHG, stopped immediately, because of the large quantities already present in the atmosphere. If emissions continue, the impacts would be even worse. In order to understand how the climate will likely change in the future and its consequences, scientists have developed climate projections. These simulate the response of the climate system to estimated future GHG emissions into the atmosphere based on a series of assumptions such as future socio-economic and technological developments. The figures, combining 3 climate scenarios for different levels of potential global action on climate change with projected child population data, show the difference in the number of children who will be living in areas with important changes in average surface temperatures. Children not living in the zone outlined in the maps will still be affected by climate change. On the interactive programme, you may explore more by clicking on each scenario to enlarge, and we have done this for you. Climate change impacts on children. Climate change undermines children's most basic rights, putting their survival and well-being in danger. Major climate-related risks which can have a profound impact on children arise from the following phenomena: drought and water stress, floods and severe storms, heat stress, air pollution, change in the incidence and geographic spread of diseases. On the interactive programme, you may explore more by clicking on the circles. Hover over them to see which one to click first. We've done this for you in some instances. Once you have finished exploring this page, move forward on the module, going to the next. Nearly 160 million children live in areas of high or extremely high drought severity. Drought is caused by an intense and persistent shortage of precipitation resulting in water shortage. The water stress associated with drought can be further aggravated by increased evaporation due to higher temperatures and competing water usage. Children and drought severity map. The map shows that children living in areas particularly prone to drought are mostly located in low-income countries. Africa has the highest number of children living in such areas, 84 million, followed by Asia, 58 million, the Americas, 14 million, and Europe, 1 million. Droughts can happen in areas already affected by important challenges, exacerbating their effect. Considering the 160 million children living in areas of high or extremely high drought severity, nearly 70 million are also in countries with low access to improved sanitation. Nearly 60 million are in countries with low access to safe water, and over 50 million are in areas where half or more of the population lives with less than $3 per day. Potential impacts of droughts and water stress on children: lack of clean water and undernutrition, development of diseases, lack of clean water and undernutrition exploitation, and emotional disruption. With drought, water becomes scarce, crops fail, livestock dies, and income drops. As children need more food and water per unit of body weight than adults, they suffer from nutritional deprivation. This can affect children's physical and cognitive development. Undernutrition, as well as unsafe water consumption, also contributes to a range of diseases and is responsible for nearly half of all under 5 deaths. Furthermore, more frequent wildfires increase the risk of destruction and deaths. Smoke is dangerous, particularly for children under 12 years old. In terms of safety, the loss of income can force children to beg or accept dangerous jobs. Children left without the supervision of family members who search for food are more exposed to violence, exploitation, and abuse. In all these circumstances, school attendance drops. Lack of resources can cause conflict or migration. In situations of mass migration, overcrowding can affect water and sanitation conditions and consequently children. Key service providers such as health workers can also decide to leave affected areas, reducing the services available to families. Beyond physical well-being and protection, children can experience emotional distress, such as the fear of being separated from their families and lack of emotional support. On the interactive programme, click on Abdu's photo to learn more about how drought is affecting him and other children in Ethiopia. We have done that for you. Abdu Mohammed, 15, is from Afar, Ethiopia. Because of the drought that affected his country in 2016, one of the strongest El Niño events on record, he lacks food and clean drinking water. In the country, an estimated 435,000 children are in need of treatment for severe acute malnutrition, and more than 1.7 million children and pregnant and lactating women are in need of supplementary feeding. More than 5.8 million people are in need of emergency water, sanitation and hygiene (WASH) services. Over 500 million children live in extremely high flood occurrence zones. Floods can be caused by extreme weather events such as storms and cyclones, and also by a rise in sea level or a combination of both. Children and flood occurrence map. Around 530 million children live in areas that are extremely prone to floods, and the vast majority being in Asia. As in the case of droughts, floods can overlap with existing crises, being particularly detrimental to children. For instance, among the children living in extremely high flood occurrence zones, over 270 million are also in countries with low access to improved sanitation, over 400 million in countries with a high proportion of diarrheal deaths, and over 300 million children in countries where half or more of the population live on less than $3.10 per day. In addition, approximately 115 million children globally live in high or extremely high tropical cyclone risk zones, with again Asia being by far the most vulnerable continent. Potential impacts of floods and severe storms on children: injuries and drowning, diseases due to food, water contamination, malnutrition. Direct impacts from floods and severe storms on children include injuries and death by drowning, as many children lack sufficient strength to stay on their feet when currents are fast, including in shallow water. Beyond these immediate risks, floods pose a grave risk to children's health. Particularly, floods can provoke water contamination, increasing, for instance, the risk of diarrhea, which is the second leading cause of death in children under 5. Floods also damage sanitation facilities as well as houses, schools and shelters. In addition, livelihood and food security can be affected, with consequent malnutrition, especially for young children. In this case, breastfeeding becomes crucial, both as the best source of nutrition for babies and a source of antibodies. In extreme situations, people can be forced to leave the affected areas, even for long periods of time. Children separated from their families can be unprotected and exposed to exploitation, abuse, and trafficking. Children are also particularly sensitive to post-traumatic stress disorder, being 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from the disorder than adults, and for longer. On the 8th of November 2013, Typhoon Haiyan struck the Philippines. This was one of the most powerful and destructive typhoons ever recorded. As a consequence of this event, 6,000 people were killed. 5,922,000 children were affected, and 1,722,000 were displaced. Haiyan struck just a month after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake in Bohol province, which affected 3.2 million people, and 2 months after conflict in the city of Zamboanga had displaced at least 60,000 people. The combination of these 3 crises created tremendous challenges for the affected population. Children such as Napsa, aged 3, from Zamboanga City, suffer from severely acute malnourishment. Extreme heat will become a growing and a regular problem for children in many parts of the world. Human-induced climate change has increased the frequency and severity of heat waves across the globe. Potential impact of heat stress on children: heat stroke, heat cramps, dehydration, vulnerability to other diseases. Extreme heat is a real threat to children's well-being, not just in countries around the equator, but also in many temperate climates. It affects children directly, but also through a variety of heat-related illnesses. Children under 12 months are the most vulnerable. Infants and small children are more likely to die or suffer from heat stroke because they are unable to regulate their body temperature and control their surrounding environment. Other heat-related illnesses include heat rash, heat-related cramps, and exhaustion. Extreme heat stress can cause dehydration and subsequently hypothermia, which can lead to death. Factors that promote excessive fluid loss, such as diarrhea, can increase these risks. Also, children with chronic health conditions are especially affected. Finally, heat stress can be especially challenging in cold chain management, as certain microbes multiply faster and more efficiently under higher temperatures. Air pollution led to 661,000 deaths of children under 5 years of age in 2012. Air pollution, both indoor and outdoor, represents a key risk for children. Household or indoor air pollution, mostly derived from the use of fuels and coal stoves, contributes to 4.3 million deaths each year. 13%, 540,000 of these, are deaths of children under 5. More than 50% are due to pneumonia caused by soot. Exposure to household air pollution also has fatal consequences for prenatal health, leading to increased risk of stillbirth and low birth weight. Ambient or outdoor air pollution, predominantly a cause of climate change rather than effect, also has major ramifications for child health. In 2012, an estimated 3.7 million deaths worldwide were attributable to ambient air pollution. 3%, 127,000 of these deaths were of children under the age of 5. This form of air pollution tends to be worst in urban centres, where more and more children live as a result of increased urbanisation. Potential impact of air pollution on children: prenatal health effect, pneumonia, asthma. Exposure to air pollutants through inhalation is particularly dangerous for children because their lungs are small and still developing until around the age of 18. Their average breathing rate until the age of 12 is about twice as rapid as adults. Therefore, they inhale proportionately more polluted air. Increasing temperatures compound the direct toxicity of fossil fuel pollutants such as ozone, which is an important trigger of childhood asthma. Children may be more exposed than adults as they are more likely to be outside during peak ozone times. A warmer climate also promotes plant growth and pollen production, resulting in higher levels of natural allergens, further contributing to an increase in the incidence and severity of asthma and other respiratory conditions in children. Finally, as aforementioned, wildfires caused by droughts can lead to problematic levels of air pollution. Further information: more than 80% of people living in urban areas that monitor air pollution are exposed to air quality levels that exceed World Health Organization (WHO) limits. Populations in low-income cities are the most impacted, with 98% of cities in low and middle-income countries with more than 100,000 inhabitants not meeting WHO air quality guidelines. Lethal and debilitating diseases, particularly dangerous for children, are highly susceptible to changes in the climate. Diseases, malaria and dengue, temperature suitability for the transmission of malaria. Raising global temperatures have made many regions suitable for transmission of malaria. Changes in temperature, precipitation and humidity have a direct impact on the reproduction and survival of the mosquitoes that transmit malaria and dengue. Malaria is one of the world's most threatening killers. 2/3 of global malaria deaths are of children under the age of 5, amounting to over 800 such deaths per day. Because of climate change, this disease is now spreading to new areas, reaching populations and children that are not used to protecting themselves from it. Dengue fever affects approximately 50 million people and is responsible for 15,000 deaths per year. It is the most rapidly spreading mosquito-borne viral disease in the world and is endemic in over 100 countries in Africa, the Americas, the Eastern Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, and the Western Pacific. Diseases, diarrhea, cholera, and meningitis. The graph shows that meningitis cases increase in dry, hot, and dusty seasons. Stagnant water from increased rainfall, floods, or extreme weather events can influence the spread of water and foodborne diseases such as diarrhea, cholera, and meningococcal meningitis. Acute cases of diarrhea can cause dehydration through significant fluid and nutrient loss and result in death. Cholera is an acute diarrheal infection causing an estimated 3 to 5 million cases and 100,000 to 120,000 deaths each year. Children who are already malnourished or have a compromised immune system, such as those living with HIV or other diseases, are at a high risk level of these life-threatening diseases. Diarrhea and cholera are a major cause of death during disasters and other complex emergencies. Meningococcal meningitis is a climate-sensitive disease caused by a bacterial infection favoured by hot, dry and dusty conditions. Exposure to elevated concentrations of air pollutants such as carbon monoxide or particulate matter may be linked to meningitis. Exacerbated inequities. Different gender roles and norms mean that women, men, girls and boys are likely to be affected in different ways by climate change. Social limitations prevent the capacity of women and girls to learn useful skills and expose them to higher risks of disaster-related mortality. Girls are more exposed to violence and abuse following disasters. Girls are more likely to be withdrawn from school. The impacts of climate change can exacerbate existing inequities. Children from wealthier families are able to recover much faster and better than children from poorer families. They have access to more resistant and climate-resilient infrastructure, can more easily procure food and clean water, have better health and nutritional status, including continuous access to health care, and are supported by caregivers with multiple resources. Generally, their coping mechanisms do not compromise schooling. Children from poorer families face the opposite situation and may face long-term deprivation. They live in less safe, overcrowded areas with polluted air and generally greater health risks. They are more exposed to undernutrition and have limited access to safe drinking water, heat protection and health services. They are more likely to leave school, migrate unsafely and depend on caregivers working in vulnerable sectors such as agriculture. Indigenous children and climate change. Climate change poses an existential threat due to the dependent relationship with the environment and its resource. 370 million Indigenous adults and children in 90 countries are at risk of facing the direct consequences of climate change. Indigenous people represent 15% of the world's poor and are located in areas of high biological diversity. Indigenous people make up 1/3 of the 900 million people living in extreme poverty in rural areas. Climate change has a disproportionate impact on marginalised and excluded individuals and groups, including Indigenous people. Despite having contributed little to greenhouse gas emissions, they are particularly threatened as their ways of life are inextricably linked to the natural environment. Climate change will increase the frequency of extreme weather events. Experiencing cumulative shocks will be detrimental for children. Extreme climate events have negative consequences for children, even if they just occur once. However, experiencing more than one shock is more difficult to recover from, especially if events occur in quick succession. Cumulative shocks make it difficult not only to recover, but also to survive through unsustainable coping mechanisms. These have negative short and long-term consequences for children, such as school withdrawal, malnutrition, exploitation, and trafficking. It is expected that climate change will increase the frequency of extreme climate events. Globally, natural disasters are occurring almost 5 times as frequently as 40 years ago. Therefore, it is imperative to build resilience and improve equity for children today.